Dr. Shilsky, let's get into the problem. So generally, there are many clinical trials that take longer than one would hope to fill. And the FDA, and I know scientists have been saying, well, gee, how do we know what we're testing applies to people maybe with different ethnic, gender backgrounds, a variety of different situations. And often we can't find people who fit those categories to be in. What is that? How poorly have we been doing in the past with diversity in trials? And what does that mean for developing new medicines?
Well, we don't do well in almost any dimension. You know, we don't get enough underrepresented minorities in clinical trials. We don't get enough older people in clinical trials. You have to remember that 60% of cancers occur in people 65 years and older. And yet, only about 10% of people participating in clinical trials are 65 and older. So we are having to treat the majority of older people, and I would say the majority of minority people, with data derived from participants in clinical trials who are not like them. And we need to change that for a whole host of reasons. It's historically been very challenging. And the problems really sort of boil down into three big areas that I think we can discuss a little bit further. First is awareness. Many people are not aware that clinical trials are even an option for them. Many people think that a clinical trial is a last resort, and I wanted to spell that myth right out of the box. I mean, clinical trials can be a very good option for patients right from the time of their cancer diagnosis, even if it's their very first treatment. So clinical trials, may be a last resort, but they don't have to be. And there are many clinical trials that are appropriate for people right following the initial diagnosis of their cancer. So there's the awareness issue. And sometimes, frankly, not even the doctors are aware of what the clinical trial options are for their patients. And the one thing we know for sure is that the most influential person as to whether or not a patient goes into a clinical trial is their doctor. If the doctor doesn't recommend it, if the doctor's not aware of it, it's not going to happen. But then you get into the more technical issues. There are rules for clinical trials because they are research studies, they are experiments, there are very well-defined rules, most of which are in place to protect the people who are participating in the study. And some of these rules are called eligibility criteria. And they specify the characteristics of people who can enroll in the study. Well, historically, they tend to be very rigid and very limiting. And you'll often hear people talk about how the only people who can get into clinical trials are Olympic athletes. Well, that may be the case, but it's not Olympic athletes that we're treating in the clinic every day. So we need to make our clinical trials more representative so that they're more applicable to the typical person that a doctor sees in their office. And then there are the logistical or operational issues of the clinical trial. The clinical trial can be very burdensome. Mel just described how he had to travel from his home in Atlanta to Houston to participate in a clinical trial. Not everybody can afford to do that. Not everybody can take time away from work, time away from home. And the clinical trial requires not only that you travel sometimes, but that you travel on a specific schedule because of the requirements of the trial. So all of these are issues that can limit participation in trials, and many of them are magnified in minority populations or in populations that don't have the economic resources to be able to meet the requirements of a trial.
Right. Let's talk about that for a minute. So, Cecilia, you go out in the community and speak to people, and you probably meet some people who maybe are diagnosed with a blood cancer, like you're active with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, so you may speak to them. And they say, even if you brought up about a trial, they say, hey, Cecilia, I'm working 2 jobs. Or my husband or spouse is working 2 jobs, and we got 2 kids, 3 kids. How could we ever participate? We just can't get away, or we don't have the family support. Or what? Those are real issues, right?
True, true. Those are real issues. And I try to direct them towards some resources that Mel and I found out about along the way. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, they have resources to help with travel, and the American Cancer Society has resources that help with hotel and lodging. And there are a number of other different types of funds that can be assessed to make that a possibility. But you're right, Andrew. I had one young lady at a health fair, and a second cancer had popped up. And she was coming there to get information. And she was saying that they were saying it wasn't too much they could do. And I brought up MD Anderson, and she immediately said, I can't go out there, I have to go to work. And she turned around and left. And so when they listen to me, then I'm always glad to tell them about it and let them know there is an option and that clinical trials work. And I point them to Melvin, my husband, as a success story also.